Every club. Every day. The Global Sports Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to Daily Southampton, part of the Global Sports Podcast Network. As you can notice from the fact that I'm sat on my own without any of my Daily Southampton colleagues, what we promised you was a Tactics Tuesday, and Greg and Oscar filmed a Tactics Tuesday, and alas, they were lost in the world of technical issues, which aren't things that we like, but they are unfortunately something we need to put up with again. And due to commitments, both of which being football, both of my colleagues are unavailable. So I've done a bit of a research episode. I like to put these kind of things together on occasion, as anyone who is a long-term listener is aware. And what I've decided to do for what I am calling Throwback Tuesday is put together something about where we were this time last year and where we were this time the last relegation season, and how that compares to how we're doing now. And yeah, it turns out that it makes for some stark, kind of crazy reading. I'm filming this just after the appearance of our previous manager, Russell Martin, on Monday Night Football, talking about how he wishes that he could have done recruitment all over again and how they needed a bit more athleticism, etc., etc. And looking at it, there isn't as much change as you kind of think there should be between the two relegation seasons. And I'll get into that a little bit later. But I thought I'd start off with this time last season. So this time last season, we were fourth in the table. So we were kind of on that last sort of rundown to not wanting to be in the playoff spots. But unfortunately, we didn't really hugely move. So we were at 73 points at this point. We were 5 behind Ipswich, who would obviously then go on to overtake Leeds and win promotion, not in the really stressful Wembley way. At this point in the season, we had 22 wins, which honestly feels like a fever dream at this point. 7 draws and 7 losses. So it's just a very much a different time. And the game at this time last year that we had just played was the reverse fixture of when Sunderland beat us 5-0 at the beginning of the season, in which we all started going, oh, this Russell Martin fella, maybe it's not that great. We actually won this game 4-2. And there's some interesting points about this game, which I'll point out. So, all 4 of the goals are scored by people who are no longer with the club. Adam Armstrong is technically with the club and under contract, but as we know, he's currently on loan at West Brom. But other than that, it was Stuart Armstrong and 2 goals from Joe Rothwell, arguably extremely important goals from Rothwell. It was his goals that sealed the win after we managed to let in 2 after being 2-0 up. So even in the Championship, we still hadn't quite sorted out that let's not concede as bad as we do now, which is, slightly upsetting. But the team that we had in that game contained Harwood-Bellis, Stevens, Bednarek, Manning, Smallbones, and Downs, which, considering both Manning, Bednarek, Smallbone, and Harwood-Bellis were all part of the team the other day against Liverpool, shows you that we probably haven't changed the team as much as we probably should have. Downs wasn't even in the squad. I don't know what that's about. Maybe we'll find out this week. But yeah, it's just a bit strange to think. I'll start to talk later on about some of the players we've had that have come in this season, how many times they've actually appeared and what they're doing. But it doesn't make for good reading, put it that way. So one of the things I thought was interesting about this game was Dibbling was actually on our bench for that game, which I thought was quite bizarre. So, looking back, if only we kick-started him a little bit earlier, and maybe he got that little bit of Championship experience. But I do worry that he would have just gone down the sort of path of Adozie and Shea Charles and be loaned out anyway. Solomana and Aribo both came on as subs during that game. The bench had James Bree, who's also been a regular starter for us, Shea Charles, who's currently out on Wednesday, having a good loan spell, Adozie, Lumley, and and Mara, who's obviously departed now. So I think that last season demonstrates some of the problems that we have now. And we've basically ended up almost keeping the exact same lineup of players that we had then, with a few differences. I'm not going to underestimate the influence of, say, Matias Fernandez. He's played so many games for us, but it is one of those sort of crazy things to think about, that we should have had a major shake-up. And most teams do. I think of sort of the likes of Nottingham Forest when they first came back up, and we really didn't. And I know that part of that is due to the whole Russell Martin wanting to show loyalty to the players that brought him up, but that has meant that we've missed out majorly. And his admittance tonight on Monday Night Football that there has been a problem with recruitment, and that sort of everyone was kind of recruiting for a Premier League window that they'd never really experienced before in, being a management team in the Premier League. It's extremely stark, because we've ended up, a lot of the players we're still playing are the players that we had last season, as opposed to all of the sort of new recruits we've brought in, or alternatively, a lot of the new recruits from the bench. Les is probably another one who has been instrumental in the last couple of games, but he has not played as many games as you would think that he has, considering the influence he's had since Sturridge has come in. So yeah, it's a very strange one, but obviously it was a much happier time, and we kind of were all aware of the warning flags. And at that point, right, again, we were 2-0 up, we went 2-2, and it took some heroics from a player that's now on loan at another championship club that are flying, for us to kind of realise what was going on. So yeah, it's actually, whilst it was significantly more positive to now, and we all had that feeling, and the wins and the draws and the losses don't really paint a picture of the naivety we had coming into this year, and the naivety that Russell Martin had coming into this year, and the naivety that I think the ownership still demonstrate a little bit with how tough this league is. But it was a happier time because all that the focus was us getting back up. But remember, we still did it the hard way. We didn't get one of those top two spots when we were very much expected to probably do that. And, I think that shows you that it was going to be a lot harder at that point. And bear in mind, we were fourth coming up. So yeah, it's a lot of change has taken place. And I don't know whether or not I don't think that a lot of it has been as positive as it felt at the time, but I also am very aware that they were probably doing the best they could at the time. And all I know is that I missed the championship greatly, just due to the feeling around the club. And I think that if we looked and maybe paid more attention to what was going to happen, and the fact that we've barely realistically changed the team, considering, yeah, it's a bit of a strange one. But what we'll do after the break is we'll talk about the season before, where we actually went down from the Premier League. Our relegation season. A relegation season was not a enjoyable one. However, it turns out we were actually in a significantly brighter spot than we are now, which really shows you what the last couple of years have done, and whether you want to blame the managers, the recruitment, Sports Republic, or whoever. I'm just going to lay out to you some of the facts that I've got written down. But you'll hear more from me after a break and a word from our partners at Bioniq.
Your body is unique, and Global Sports Podcast Network has partnered with Bioniq, the world's most personalised supplements. Bioniq provide 100% tailor-made supplements designed to deliver precisely what your body needs at exactly the right levels to optimise your health. No guessing. So click the link in the show notes. Use the code GSPN2025 for 40% off your first month's subscription. Bioniq. Don't settle for off-the-shelf solutions made for just anybody. Get what's right for you right now.
And we are back. So, I said we'd talk about the 2022 to 2023 season. So let's talk about it. This time in the 2022-2023 season, we were actually 19th. We had 21 points in comparison to our measly 9, which, if you remember the sort of sense of foreboding and doom that was around the club, even at that point, it was still a very, very different sort of landscape and situation. we had managed 6 wins, and I can only tell you the 2 I remember. And one of them is one of the ones we're going to talk about. The other one was sort of the win at Chelsea when Sellers was first in charge. But we had 3 draws and 16 losses. So we were, we had quite a sort of, we'd racked up the sort of what is now the Saints' way of losing and throwing away points, which is a bit sad because, again, like during this period of time, we've now been through 4 managers, which is wild. So Bournemouth were actually behind us at the time, which shows you the stark contrast in fortunes between the clubs now, right? Like Bournemouth are on to try and get Europe. They are our rivals, not rivals. And in my opinion, it's one of those things that I'm happy for Bournemouth because I don't really see them as real rivals. But there we are. So the goal difference at the time was minus 21, which comparison to now, we have only scored 19 goals overall this season. So, it was still pretty bad, but not half as bad as now. And I think a lot of that is thanks to the odd free kick from James Ward-Prowse and other bits and pieces. So this time in that season, we'd just managed to play Leicester. So I think previously on the show, I've talked about this game before. And we won that game. It was Charlie Alcaraz that scored early on. We had a penalty from James Ward-Prowse that was missed. And it was just one of those ridiculous games where Iheanacho kept trying to get the ball in the net and somehow it just did not go in. Leicester probably deserved to win that game by far. They just kept missing absolute sitters. Both Sulemana Bella-Kotchap, Yanni B, and Gavin Bazunu all played that game. We had 4 yellow cards, and we were the last team in the Premier League to keep a clean sheet. So I'm guessing that was probably our first clean sheet of the season, which says so much. And it's still I think we discussed it the other day, me, Oscar, and Greg. The team needs to be built around its not letting goals in. And we were really bad that season for it. We didn't really fix that problem in the Championship, and now it's just catastrophic. And it seems that we keep trying to play systems where we can't actually defend the ball properly. And again, I'll leave that to the more tactically astute colleagues of mine. But it is a kind of crazy thing that we just haven't sorted that out, and that hasn't been a focus, despite the fact that it has been our biggest area of concern. And now we're at a point where we can't even score the goals. At least back then, we could rely a little bit on sort of the odd free kick here and there. Whereas now, as we will remember from the first half of the season, most of our set pieces don't really do a lot. They're starting to get better, maybe. At least maybe my standards have just dropped so low that I think that I take it as a win when we get a corner. But there we are. So after this game, we went on to actually draw against Man United, but that would be our last win of the season. The win against Leicester was the last win we managed that season. We actually went on to draw a couple of other times. The Manchester United game, if I remember right, it was 0-0. And the rest of our games were a 3-3 draw with Spurs, a 3-3 draw with Arsenal, and a 4-4 with Liverpool. So those are the only games that weren't losses right up until the end of the season. It was a much closer affair as well, because the difference between us and 15th was 3 points. There were a bunch of teams at this time with 21 points at the bottom. So, really sort of, again, contrasts the fortunes of now and how different the league is. It's just kind of wild. You forget realistically it's 2 years. Two years, and you don't think a lot can change. And I know I've ended up doing a video essay on how 10 years can be a long time in football, but even 2 years at this point, just the money, the athleticism, just in general, it is one of the best leagues in the world for a reason. I don't know if I'm going to necessarily say it is the best league in the world. That is not for me necessarily to decide. But, there is a reason that the Premier League is popular, but I don't think that this year has been a good advert for it. It is, you can laugh or you can cry on the opinions of what's going on with Manchester United and what's going on with Tottenham and all that kind of stuff. There have been some nice stories. I think that Bournemouth is a nice story. I think that Nottingham Forest is a really nice story. I think that the collapse of Manchester City is maybe teaching people to not base their entire football club around one guy, whether that be Pep or Rodri. You can make that decision. Yeah, it's a kind of, it's mad how much of it has changed in the last couple of years. But I think that this season has been a sense of we know what to expect next season. I remember the mood, even at this time, the first relegation season being so different because we had been such a staple in the Premier League at this point. We had narrowly escaped a couple of years previously with a 1-0 win, very very last minute against Swansea, with Gabby Adini being the hero that we maybe didn't deserve. So it's a weird one, and it's weird to talk about in general and look back retrospectively, because to say now, oh yeah, I know, I'd love to take that position. I still think that the mood was different then. It was far more desperate, far more depressing. We didn't know what relegation meant. We didn't know how the championship would be. We assumed we'd lose all of our best players. We lost a lot of players, but we didn't lose, I know that James Ward-Prowse bent, but like there was a lot of sort of grass is greener on the other side for a lot of our players that went on. But yeah, it was just a generally strange mood, I think, for most people. But it's fine. We ended up having to deal with relegation, and then we got to see sort of a rebuild, and we got to have the season that we had, which again, we didn't fundamentally stop a lot of the problems we've now seen this season. But because it worked at the time, it worked at the time. And it's why I think now we have such a, especially in the fan base, such a bigger, sort of wider look at the future, because we do not want to be a yo-yo club. And the reality is, at the moment, it looks like that's going to be the case unless we start getting in people who are able to run the football club efficiently and have a plan and understand it. And part of that is down to, lost members of staff. We've been through all of this. There's a couple of episodes we've got. If you fancy listening back, if you don't, I can understand. I talk a lot. You're listening to an episode now, so if you're still here, I appreciate it. But yeah, it's very much there have been lots of warning signs, and I still somehow think that as much as it's harrowing this season, it didn't have the feel of desperation and worry that it had the last relegation. And last season we had too much of our sort of positivity blinkers on, except this was around the time it started to turn, because we were trying to catch up to those top spaces and we were ultimately unable to get them. And as much as we were promoted, we were one of the teams. We won the playoffs. We didn't get the top two positions, and as we can see from both Leicester and Ipswich, now it's still a massive struggle. So yeah, it's a bit of an odd one. But now, after another break and a word from our partners at Zencaster, we're going to talk about some things that I've written down for this season. So obviously we talked a lot about this season. We've been doing a daily podcast about the entirety of this season. So I've just noted down a few stats and a few little things here and there that I thought were slightly strange, or things that I'd forgotten about genuinely. And yeah, just some fun tidbits to kind of show where we are now in comparison, and show you, I guess, when we talk about how recruitment's failed, I think that some of these things that I have are glaring highlights of that. After a word from our partners at Zencaster. Here at the Global Sports Podcast Network, we spent a lot of time selecting our delivery platform. Zencastr came out the clear winner, with 4K video recording from your phone and AI editing that automatically removes those ums and ahs. It's super easy to start a podcast that sounds great and is delivered efficiently. If you're ready to tell your story, check out the link in the show description to learn more about Zencastr. So, we are back. And by we, I mean me. And I didn't go anywhere because I read that ad out. Sometimes when you talk to yourself, you go a bit loopy. So I apologise. But let's crack on with this season. So we all know the position we're in. We have 9 points. And 9 points is not a lot. And it's, we're on course to be the worst team in Premier League history. We keep making that point and stressing it, which is why for some of my colleagues wanting to get these sort of illustrious, glorious wins, I will happily take out us drawing 0-0 until we get past that points tally. So we have dropped 23 points after taking the lead so far this season. So if we manage to hold on to all of our leads, it would be a very, very different kettle of fish. And I think that says a lot about the mentality And the way this league is that we've always struggled to do that. This over the last two seasons, it was a thing we struggled. We managed to find some quote unquote character in the Championship, and the Huddersfield game, the Sunderland game I just recently spoke about. Both of those things are examples of us being able to sort of get back in it after having the mentality knocked a little bit. But I guess if you've lost pretty much every game in a row, you can see what it does to the players when they go down. You can see what it is, especially like the nature of the Liverpool game, right? We've already discussed it. But to have 2 goals in such quick succession, to go from winning to all of a sudden losing, you're shell-shocked. And by the time you're trying to come back, you just know that ultimately it wasn't going to be. We all knew it, and it was difficult. But it shows you how important the sort of the mentality and the physical side of the game is. And like I think long before anyone that we've heard out in the media space and that kind of saying this, I know that my colleague Greg has specifically banged on that he finds it wild that so many of our players can barely manage 90 minutes, especially because of just the sheer amount of running they need to do. But we have got some players that have managed, a lot of minutes so far this season. Obviously, one of our most athletic players, with the player with the most full appearances in the Premier League this season, was Kyle Walker-Peters with 29. So, like him or lump him, I know that some people were controversially, in my opinion, don't think that he's been great. I think he has been one of our better players. I'm not saying he's set the world alight, but I think that we are a better team with him in it. He's managed a lot of games this season and he will be gone at the end because let's face it, I very much doubt he's going to re-sign to go back down to the Championship if there is ample opportunity elsewhere. And, there's quite a few crossover episodes we've had. I think most recently, actually, our crossover with Liverpool. Louis from the Liverpool team spoke about how he would take Kyle Walker-Peters in his team, even as a sort of sub. So, yeah. And then we've got one of our big problems, which I've already pointed out, is that we have 19 goals overall. And our top goal scorer in the Premier League is Joe Aribo with 3, who is not our striker, not either of our strikers, which, arguably at the moment, it depends if you count Sulemana in that position. I still don't, despite the fact he's often kind of played like that. Dibbling, I guess, kind of, but also he's not a striker. Paul and Cameron Archer both sit on 2. So it says a lot. And that is one of our biggest problems. And I'm relatively sure that the lads discussed it in the now defunct and lost media Tactics Tuesday that would have been. So one of the other people I wanted to talk about was how Grombach has had 2 starts and 1 substitute appearance, which is more than Cornet managed in the entirety of his time with us in the league. He had 1 appearance and 1 substitute appearance. So once again, recruitment being a huge issue. And despite the fact that we obviously had a big changed squad when we went into the Championship. A lot of the players we sort of brought in were utilised significantly more. Like I'm talking about David Brooks and Rothwell, kind of players we brought in were utilised significantly more than both our loan signings and new signings. Obviously, we're getting a lot of use out of Les now, but he went a fair bit of the early season without getting the game time that he probably would have wanted, expected, and we probably should have used. So, yeah, I think it demonstrates our problems now in comparison to the last sort of 2 seasons is, we kind of went all out a little bit in that first relegation season to try and save the season with January signings. And Grombach is our only January signing other than Wellington, which was obviously pre-agreed. And Wellington has actually had 3 starts, which is more than one of our left backs who we have signed this season, which is Charlie Taylor, who has started twice. Obviously, he's had more substitute appearances, but again, the fact that we have somebody that came in January who has started more games than somebody we bought in the summer specifically for a role just shows you how disjointed the whole thing has kind of been. Lardan has started a couple of games. He started 5. I'm guessing they were early tenures because I genuinely don't remember seeing him start. But he has had 9 substitute appearances. But in comparison to the amount of games we've played, I don't want to say if it was wasted, but he's not changed the game to the level that I think that he should have or we'd have expected him to when we brought him in. And I thought a lot of us, myself included, thought that maybe that was a shrewd, good bit of business. And it kind of just feels it's not giving me the vibes of when Theo Walcott came back, right? Like Theo Walcott came back for 2 seasons and yeah, he was a bit sort of rusty, but like he could still run. He still put some goals away. And it just kind of feels like, with Lallana being as injury prone as he was anyway, it does feel like very much he's having a really harsh lesson in coaching through what he's had to experience so far this season. And maybe the experience is going to be good for him. Maybe, maybe having that senior player behind the scenes is good. I genuinely don't know, because we don't get kind of told that stuff. I think I remember sort of Russell Martin spoke highly of having him behind the scenes, and I don't really know. Juric hasn't really said much of anything about him, to be honest. So yeah, it's one of those weird ones where, like, I do wonder if maybe we should have just brought him in as a coaching role immediately, rather than, as someone to have around the club that's good, as opposed to trying to have him as a player. Regardless of whether there's no transfer fee involved, there are wages involved. And I don't know if that would have helped us get somebody else, or whether or not people didn't want to join us. I guess we'll have to figure it out. So some other people on my list is obviously Ryan Fraser has had 4 starts and 4 sub appearances. You would be inclined to think that he wasn't here anymore, because we haven't heard or seen anything from him in a long time. I think he had a couple of times where he made the bench, but obviously we know that he was quite close with Russell Martin, and that relationship is no longer there. And we haven't really heard or seen much of him. And he played a pivotal role in our promotion campaign last season. But this season, the most that people remember him for is that one red card he got, which I still kind of think was a bit harsh. But at the same time, that is unfortunately what he's going to be remembered for. Adozi, Alcaraz, Edwards, and Amu have all had a substitute appearance at least once this season. So before they all had sent out on loans and their loan spells, they have all had a sub appearance, which is wild, because I kind of forget, with Alcaraz now being at Everton, Adozi spending the season at Anderlecht, Edwards now having a nice time at QPR, and Amu out now to Frankfurt for the foreseeable. Yeah, it's a bit of a strange one, because it shows you, again, we have quite a big squad and some of players that we kind of we don't think about because they're not in the forefront of our mind. They're actually still here. They're just out on loan, and they are going to hopefully come in handy next season. Or alternatively, they will help us build a war chest to, unfortunately, rebuild again. One of the last things I wanted to mention was Bella Kotchap now has as many starts as Ross Stewart, and is one-off matches in his sub-appearances of 3, because Bella Kotchap has come off the bench twice now, both to replace an injured Jan Bednarek. So, Stewart has obviously become another one of the forgotten men. And really, I think all of these points and these little weird stats that I found just kind of demonstrate how strange the season is, and how strange it's become, and how I think a lot of us are kind of just willing to get over the line. I don't think there's anyone here that now believes that we're going to stay up. I'm pretty sure it can all be confirmed in the Wolves game now. But it's such a strange mix of emotions, because, again, I still remember feeling slightly more distressed in the first relegation, just because of simply the process of events, and the getting rid of Hasenhüttl and the Nathan Jones, and then the getting rid of Jones and keeping Sellis, and the lots of transfers in to try and save it. It all seemed even more chaotic. Whereas obviously they've tried not to have that level of chaos this time round, and it's not worked out either. But yeah, I just, thought I'd do a nice sort of retrospective. I say nice, it might have ended up just bumming you all out a little bit more. But, that's the reality. And maybe we'll do this again next season, this time next year. And, we could be flying high with 90 points to the championship right at the top. Or, God forbid we end up with sort of in a Luton situation where we're right at the bottom. I'm already terrified about the fact we're going to have to deal with 2 massive derby games next year, looking at the current table. So, yeah, it will be what it will be. But thank you for joining me in this retrospective, if you are still here. It's always, as I said, always a bit of a strange one when you do these sort of like video essays to yourself. But, it's kind of a last minute thing to save our Tuesday. And give you some fresh new content, off the back of, another sort of week where we're going to end up building up to another game where we're inevitably going to get excited. Greg is definitely going to predict a win this time round. We're going to think it's all good because of XYZ, and Kuna's out, so maybe we'll get a chance this time. And then we'll probably do Southampton things. But there's always that little bit of optimism that lives in everyone's heart that maybe we do get a win, maybe we beat Derby's record, and then we can actually go on to trying to build something for next season. But how our fortunes have turned and how different the last 3 seasons have been is something beyond me. And I know every season's different, but I think when we were an established Premier League team, it was always about just sort of climbing up, especially after we had our lofty heights of sort of eighth, and then now we were trying to rebuild to that period of time, and then the harsh realities of the last couple of years have kicked into gear. But all we can do is look to the future, and I know that there are a lot of fans that are upset right now. Myself included. It's hard to do a daily podcast for stuff like this when it's the mood around camp is so harrowing. So we do our best to kind of say I say balance each other out, I guess, is the main thing. So to produce some sort of entertainment and fun for you all. But we appreciate you all as always. Thank you very much for joining me and keeping me company today. You can catch us all on the social media. So obviously we're on Facebook, we are on Twitter, we are on Blue Sky. We are back on the GSPN Southampton YouTube, where we will be posting shorts and the full episode. So if you want to hear me ramble into myself and watch me look up and down as I read out my notes and try and keep something going, you can check us out there. And other than that, we're on obviously the Instagram and TikTok. So yeah, let us know your thought. Does this season feel different? How disconnected are you with Southampton now? Are you, do you think this relegation is worse than the last, or has the inevitable sort of tally of 9 points tempered expectations, so there doesn't feel like there's going to be any last grasp attempts to kind of stay up like there was maybe the season before when we got relegated? So yeah, share your thoughts. And other than that, I wish you all a wonderful Tuesday, whether you're listening to in the morning, in the afternoon, or in the evening. And we will see you tomorrow for a fun wild card where we basically play unpopular opinions, which is kind of almost like our Room 101, but we're far more brazen in what we actually think. So you can look forward to Greg definitely trying to rile some people up. And until then, we will see you in the next one.
Every club, every day. The Global Sports Podcast Network.